The gunshot echoed across the dusty plains of Nevada as Daisy Whitaker's trembling hands gripped the reins of her stolen horse, the animal rearing in panic beneath her. Blood splattered the hem of her once pristine traveling dress, not her blood, but that of the man her father had arranged for her to marry, the man who'd tracked her 3 days across the territory after she'd fled the wedding altar. "Come on," she urged the frightened horse, glancing back at the approaching dust cloud that signaled more riders. "Please, just a little farther." It was 1875, and Las Vegas was nothing more than a dusty outpost in the Nevada desert, a way station between the silver mines of Virginia City and the expanding railroads connecting the frontier. The small settlement had sprung up around a natural spring, drawing travelers and those seeking fortune or escape from their past. For Daisy, it represented the last hope of freedom. Her cousin Dorothy Warren rode alongside her, her face pale with fear and exhaustion. Just 20 years old to Daisy's 19, Dorothy had her own reasons for fleeing their hometown of Sacramento. Their respective fathers' brothers by blood who had built a successful banking enterprise together had arranged marriages for both young women to secure business partnerships that would expand their empire eastward. "We can't keep going like this," Dorothy shouted over the thundering hooves. "The horses are nearly spent." Daisy knew her cousin was right. They had pushed the animals hard, riding through the night after escaping the posse her father had sent after them. The bullet she'd fired had been a desperate act. Mr. Holloway had grabbed her, his meaty hands bruising her arm as he tried to drag her from the saddle. She hadn't meant to kill him, only to frighten him away. The horror of what she'd done still churned in her stomach. "The settlement should be just beyond that ridge," Daisy called back. "We can find somewhere to hide, maybe sell these horses for tickets on the next stage heading east." The distant outline of Las Vegas appeared as they crested the hill, a collection of wooden structures, most no more than 1 story high, clustered around the small creek that gave the settlement life. A weathered church steeple rose above the dusty main street, and several horses were hitched outside what appeared to be a saloon. As they approached the outskirts, Dorothy's horse suddenly stumbled, letting out a distressed whinny before going down on one knee. "Daisy!" Dorothy cried out, tumbling from the saddle with a grace that belied her exhaustion. She landed on her feet, though barely, clutching the saddle horn to stay upright. Daisy wheeled her mount around, heart pounding. "Are you hurt?" "I'm fine, but Maple isn't." Dorothy stroked the mare's sweating neck. "She's done for, poor thing." The sound of distant riders grew louder. They had perhaps 15 minutes before their pursuers would spot them on the open approach to town. "Take my hand," Daisy urged, extending her arm. "We'll ride double." Dorothy shook her head. "Not on this poor animal. He's nearly spent too. We'd kill him before we reach town." "Then we walk," Daisy decided, dismounting. She quickly untied their saddlebags and slung them over her shoulder. "Come on." The sisters abandoned the horses, trudging toward Las Vegas with desperate determination. The sun beat down mercilessly, their fancy traveling clothes now torn and dust-covered, offering little protection against the elements. Daisy's thoughts raced as quickly as her heart. They had some money sewn into their undergarments, but not enough to start new lives. They needed help, and they needed it soon. As they neared the first buildings of the settlement, a rider appeared from a side trail, moving at a steady canter toward them. Daisy instinctively reached for the small derringer hidden in her pocket, the same gun that had already taken one man's life. "Easy now," Dorothy whispered, placing a restraining hand on Daisy's arm. The rider approached, and Daisy could see he was a tall man with sun-bronzed skin. He wore a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his features, but she could make out a strong jawline and the glint of alert eyes. Unlike the dandies her father associated with, this man had the weathered look of someone who lived by his wits and skill rather than family connections. "Ladies," he called out, pulling his horse to a stop several paces away. "You look like you could use some assistance." Daisy eyed him warily. "We're fine, sir, just heading into town." He glanced past them toward the horizon and the cloud of dust that was growing larger. "Running from something, I'd wager." His tone wasn't accusatory, merely matter-of-fact. Dorothy stepped forward. "Please, sir, we need to reach Las Vegas quickly. There are men following us who mean us harm." The man studied them for a long moment. "My name's Preston Blackburn. I own a small ranch about 2 miles outside of town." He gestured toward the dust cloud. "Those fellows chasing you, they lawmen?" "No," Daisy answered quickly. "Perhaps too quickly." Preston nodded slowly. "Well, I reckon that's enough for me to know right now. Climb up. My horse can carry the 3 of us as far as the edge of town." Daisy hesitated, but Dorothy was already moving forward. With few options and time running short, Daisy accepted Preston's outstretched hand and allowed him to pull her up behind him. Dorothy scrambled up behind her, and soon they were trotting toward Las Vegas. "What brings 2 fine ladies like yourselves all the way out here, running from trouble?" Preston asked over his shoulder. "Our fathers arranged marriages for us," Dorothy explained before Daisy could stop her. "To men 3 times our age who view women as property to be traded. We refused." Preston made a noncommittal sound. "That sort of thing happens more often than folks like to admit." They rode in silence for a few minutes before he spoke again. "Those men following you, how determined are they?" Daisy swallowed hard. "Very. One of them is already dead." To her surprise, Preston merely nodded. "Las Vegas isn't the safest place for 2 young women on their own. Sheriff's a decent man, but he can't be everywhere, and some of the miners passing through have been 6 months without seeing a proper lady." As they neared the edge of town, he slowed his horse. "I've got a proposition for you. My ranch hand just left to care for his ailing mother back east. I could use some help around the place cooking, cleaning, tending the garden. Nothing improper," he added hastily. "I've got a small cabin where you both could stay. It would give you a place to hide out until those men give up and move on." Daisy and Dorothy exchanged glances. "Why would you help us?" Daisy asked suspiciously. "You don't know us." Preston's expression softened slightly. "My sister ran from an arranged marriage 5 years ago. She wasn't as lucky as you 2. The man caught up with her near Reno." He didn't elaborate, but the grim set of his mouth told Daisy all she needed to know. "We accept your offer," Dorothy said quickly. "Thank you, Mr. Blackburn." "Preston, please," he corrected. "Now I need to pick up some supplies in town. You 2 stay hidden in that stand of cottonwoods by the creek." He pointed to a small cluster of trees about 100 yards off the main trail. "I'll be back within the hour, and we can ride to the ranch before sundown." As promised, Preston returned less than an hour later, his saddlebags full of supplies and leading 2 fresh horses. "Borrowed these from a friend," he explained. "We'll return them once we're sure it's safe." The ride to Preston's ranch took longer than expected as they kept to less traveled paths to avoid detection. By the time they arrived, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the modest homestead. A small main house built of rough-hewn logs stood beside a barn and corral. A vegetable garden stretched behind the house, and a creek bubbled nearby. It wasn't grand, but it looked solid and well-maintained. "It's not much," Preston said as he helped the women dismount, "but it's mine, free and clear. The cabin I mentioned is just past that stand of juniper trees. It's small, but it should serve for now." The cabin was indeed small, just a single room with a stone fireplace, a small table with 2 chairs, and a bed that would be tight for both women but manageable. A washstand stood in one corner, and shelves lined one wall. "I'll bring you some food from the main house," Preston offered. "Get settled in and we can talk more in the morning." After he left, Daisy sank onto the edge of the bed, her body finally giving in to the exhaustion of their flight. "Do you think we can trust him?" she asked Dorothy. Her cousin was examining the small cabin with approval. "I think so. He could have handed us over already if that was his intention." She sat beside Daisy. "What happened back there with Mr. Holloway, it wasn't your fault. He would have dragged you back to your father, who would have forced you to marry him anyway." Daisy nodded, though the guilt still weighed heavily. "I just hope we haven't traded one bad situation for another." True to his word, Preston returned with a tray of food, beans, cornbread, and coffee along with some clean clothing. "These belong to my sister," he explained. "They might be a bit large, but they'll be more practical than what you're wearing now." The following morning, Preston showed them around the ranch. It was modest by any standard, with a small herd of cattle, several horses, and the vegetable garden that provided much of his food. He explained that he'd come west after the war, using his savings to buy the land and build it up slowly. "I sell beef to the mining camps and to the town," he explained. "It's not a fortune, but it's a decent living." Over the next few days, Daisy and Dorothy fell into a routine of helping with the ranch chores. Dorothy proved to be an excellent cook, while Daisy, to her own surprise, took to gardening with enthusiasm. The physical labor was unlike anything they'd experienced in their privileged upbringing, but there was something satisfying about the work. Preston, for his part, maintained a respectful distance. He was unfailingly polite but reserved. Occasionally, Daisy would catch him watching her with an unreadable expression, but he would quickly look away when their eyes met. A week after their arrival, Preston rode into Las Vegas for supplies. When he returned, his expression was grim. "Your father's men are still in town," he reported. "They're offering a substantial reward for information about your whereabouts. They're claiming that you," he nodded toward Daisy, "murdered your fiancé in cold blood." Daisy paled. "It wasn't like that. He was trying to force me to go back. He grabbed me and I just wanted him to let go." Preston held up a hand. "I believe you, but they're painting a different picture in town. They've even got the sheriff interested now." Dorothy clutched Daisy's hand. "What are we going to do? We can't go back." "No, you can't," Preston agreed. "Not now. The sheriff's a fair man, but with a murder accusation, he'd have to at least arrest you and investigate." He paced the small cabin, thinking, "We need to get you farther away, maybe north to Montana Territory or west to California." "We don't have enough money for that," Daisy admitted. "What we had saved is almost gone." Preston was quiet for a long moment. "There might be another option," he said finally. "It's not ideal, but it could solve the immediate problem." "What is it?" Dorothy asked eagerly. "Marriage," he said simply. "If one of you were married to a local man, a respected rancher, for instance, it would be harder for your fathers to force you to return. A husband has legal rights that supersede a father's claim to his daughter." Daisy stared at him, understanding dawning. "You're offering to marry one of us?" Preston nodded, his expression serious. "It would be a marriage in name only, of course. Once the danger has passed, we could quietly arrange an annulment if you wished." Dorothy looked between them, her quick mind grasping something Daisy hadn't yet considered. "You mean Daisy, don't you? You're offering to marry Daisy?" Preston had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "I thought perhaps, but I would be willing to help either of you, of course." An uncomfortable silence fell over the cabin. Daisy's thoughts whirled. Marriage, even a temporary one, wasn't what she had envisioned when fleeing her father's arrangements, and yet the practical part of her could see the logic in Preston's suggestion. "I need time to think," she said finally. Preston nodded. "Of course, it's not a decision to be made lightly, but we may not have much time if the sheriff decides to organize a search of the outlying ranches." "We understand," Dorothy assured him. "We'll discuss it and let you know by morning." After Preston left, Dorothy turned to Daisy with wide eyes. "Well, that was unexpected." Daisy sank onto the bed. "He's only offering because he pities us." "I don't think that's all of it," Dorothy said thoughtfully. "I've seen the way he looks at you when you're working in the garden. There's admiration there, Daisy, perhaps even something more." Daisy shook her head. "We've known him barely a week." "Sometimes a week is enough to know your heart," Dorothy argued, "and it's not as if you have to stay married forever." As he said, it could be temporary just until this trouble passes. Daisy stared out the small window at the darkening sky. "What about you? I can't just leave you unprotected." "I'm hardly unprotected with you two around," Dorothy said with a smile. "Besides, I've been thinking about what Preston said about Montana. I have a school friend who moved there last year with her husband. She wrote that they need teachers desperately. With my education, I could find work." "You'd go so far away." "Alone," Dorothy squeezed her hand. "We knew when we left Sacramento that we were choosing uncertain paths. I'm not afraid of starting over somewhere new." The next morning, Daisy approached Preston as he was mending a fence near the corral. The early sunlight caught in his dark hair, revealing strands of copper she hadn't noticed before. "I've been thinking about your proposal," she said without preamble. Preston straightened, setting aside his tools. "And if you're serious about it being temporary until the danger passes, then I accept." Something flashed in his eyes, disappointment perhaps, but he nodded solemnly. "If that's what you want." "It's the practical solution," Daisy said, more to convince herself than him. "Practical," he echoed. "Yes." He brushed dust from his hands. "We should do it soon. I'll ride into town tomorrow and speak with the preacher. We can have a small ceremony the day after." "So quickly?" "The sooner it's official, the sooner you'll have legal protection." He hesitated, then added, "I want you to be certain, Daisy. I won't hold you to this if you have doubts." She met his gaze steadily. "I'm certain that I don't want to be dragged back to my father and forced to marry a man chosen for his business connections rather than any compatibility with me. Beyond that, I can't say I'm certain of anything anymore." A small smile touched his lips. "That's honest, at least." He reached out hesitantly, then let his hand fall. "I'll do right by you, Daisy. You have my word on that." 2 days later, Daisy found herself standing before the preacher in Las Vegas's small church, wearing one of Preston's sister's dresses that Dorothy had altered to fit her better. Preston stood beside her, freshly shaven and wearing what appeared to be his only suit, a bit threadbare at the elbows but neatly pressed. The ceremony was brief and simple. Only Dorothy, the preacher, and his wife served as witnesses. When it came time for the kiss to seal their vows, Preston merely brushed his lips against her cheek, the contact so brief she might have imagined it. "Mrs. Blackburn," he said softly as they signed the marriage certificate, the name strange and unfamiliar to her ears. They returned to the ranch that afternoon, an awkward silence hanging between them. Preston had arranged for Dorothy to stay in the main house while he and Daisy took the cabin, but he insisted on sleeping on a pallet by the fireplace, giving Daisy the bed. "This is your home now, too," he told her that evening as they ate a celebratory dinner Dorothy had prepared. "I want you to feel comfortable here, for however long you choose to stay." The following week brought a new tension to the ranch. Word of Preston's marriage had spread to town, and with it, rumors about the new Mrs. Blackburn's identity. Daisy rarely left the property, but Dorothy reported overhearing whispers when she accompanied Preston to town for supplies. "They're saying she's a murderer," one townsman had apparently remarked within Dorothy's hearing. "Blackburn's a fool if he believes whatever story she told him," another had responded. Preston dismissed their concerns. "Let them talk. It'll die down eventually." But the situation came to a head sooner than any of them expected. 10 days after the wedding, Daisy was working in the garden when the sound of approaching riders drew her attention. 3 men on horseback were coming up the path to the ranch house, and even at a distance, she recognized her father's straight-backed posture on the lead horse. Her blood turned to ice. She dropped her gardening tools and ran for the house, bursting through the door where Dorothy was kneading bread dough. "They're here," Daisy gasped. "Father and 2 men with him." Dorothy's face paled. "Where's Preston?" "Checking the north pasture. He won't be back for hours." The sound of hooves in the yard grew louder. Dorothy moved to the window, peering out cautiously. "It's them all right. Your father, mine, and that awful deputy who works for the sheriff." Daisy's mind raced. "We can't run. There's nowhere to hide." "Then we stand our ground," Dorothy said firmly, wiping flour from her hands. "You're a married woman now. They can't force you to go with them." A heavy knock sounded at the door. Daisy took a deep breath, smoothed her apron, and opened it to find herself face to face with her father, Edward Whitaker, for the first time since she'd fled the church in Sacramento. "Daisy," he said coldly, his gray eyes hard as stone, "you've led us on quite a chase." Behind him stood Dorothy's father, George Warren, and a man wearing a deputy's badge who Daisy didn't recognize. "What do you want, father?" she asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. "You know precisely what I want. You're coming home to face the consequences of your actions. You've disgraced our family name, broken a binding agreement, and worst of all, murdered Arnold Holloway." "It was self-defense," Daisy protested. "And I'm not coming back with you. I'm married now." Edward's eyebrows rose. "So I've heard. A hasty arrangement with some ranch hand." "Hardly legal, given the circumstances." "It's perfectly legal," Dorothy interjected, coming to stand beside her cousin. "They were married by the preacher right here in Las Vegas." George Warren stepped forward. "And you, daughter, are you married too, or merely hiding behind your cousin's skirts?" Dorothy lifted her chin. "I'm not hiding behind anyone. I chose freedom over being sold like cattle to increase your business prospects." The deputy cleared his throat. "Mrs. Blackburn, I have a warrant for your arrest on suspicion of murder. You'll need to come with me back to town." "She's not going anywhere," came a firm voice from behind the men. They turned to find Preston standing there, his rifle held casually but purposefully in his hands. Daisy hadn't heard him approach, but relief flooded through her at the sight of him. "This is a legal matter, mister," the deputy said, his hand moving toward his own weapon. "Don't interfere." "That's my wife you're threatening," Preston replied evenly, "and this is my property you're trespassing on. Unless you have evidence beyond the word of these gentlemen, I suggest you reconsider your position." Edward Whitaker stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. "Your marriage is a sham, sir. My daughter was promised to another man. She fled that commitment and entered into this arrangement with you under false pretenses." "The only false pretenses," Preston countered, "were yours when you tried to force your daughter to marry against her will." He moved to stand beside Daisy, his presence solid and reassuring. "In case you haven't heard, sir, this is the West. Women have choices here they might not have back East." The deputy looked uncomfortable. "Mr. Whitaker, the warrant is based on your testimony, if there are complicating factors." "The only factor that matters," Edward snapped, "is that my daughter shot a man and fled the scene. That's murder, plain and simple. It was self-defense, Daisy repeated, finding her courage. Mr. Holloway attacked me when I refused to go with him. I feared for my life. Were there witnesses to this alleged attack? The deputy asked. Dorothy stepped forward. I was there. I saw everything. Mr. Holloway grabbed Daisy with such force that he left bruises on her arm. When she tried to get away, he threatened to drag her back to Sacramento, willing or not. Those were his exact words. The deputy frowned, clearly reassessing the situation. That does change things, Miss Warren. She's lying to protect her cousin, George Warren interjected angrily. Preston's voice cut through the tension. I think we all need to calm down. Deputy, I understand you have a job to do, but I won't allow you to arrest my wife based on hearsay and accusations from men who clearly have their own interests at heart. He lowered his rifle slightly, a conciliatory gesture. If you need to investigate further, we're not going anywhere. My wife and I live here, and we're law-abiding citizens of Nevada territory, but no one is taking her away today. The standoff lasted several tense moments before the deputy finally nodded. I'll speak with the sheriff about this new information. If your wife is willing to give a formal statement about what happened with Mr. Holloway, that would help clarify matters. Edward Whitaker's face darkened with rage. This is outrageous. That girl is my daughter and she is my wife, Preston interrupted firmly. And the law recognizes that bond above all others. He turned to the deputy. My wife will come to town tomorrow to make her statement, provided you can guarantee her fair treatment and protection from these men. The deputy hesitated, then nodded. I can do that. Edward turned to Daisy, his expression cold. You think this settles things? You think you can just run away from your responsibilities, your family? Daisy met his gaze steadily. My only responsibility is to myself and the life I choose to build. You stopped being family the moment you tried to sell me to the highest bidder. Her father flinched as if she had struck him. Without another word, he turned and stalked back to his horse. George Warren followed, after casting a disappointed glance at Dorothy. The deputy lingered a moment longer. Tomorrow morning, Mrs. Blackburn, the sheriff will want to hear your side of things. After they rode away, Daisy's knees nearly buckled with relief. Preston caught her arm to steady her, his touch gentle. You were magnificent, he said quietly, standing up to them like that. Daisy looked up at him, seeing him truly for perhaps the first time, not just as her rescuer or reluctant husband, but as a man of principle and courage. Thank you for coming when you did. I told you I'd protect you, he said simply, and I meant it. That evening, after Dorothy had retired to the main house, Daisy and Preston sat before the fire in their cabin, the events of the day weighing heavily between them. What will happen tomorrow? She asked. When I give my statement to the sheriff. Preston poked at the fire, sending sparks up the chimney. If the sheriff is the man I think he is, he'll listen to your account fairly. Dorothy's testimony will help. And without any other witnesses, it becomes your word against your father's, and you have more credibility in this case, being the one directly involved. He looked over at her. But I want you to be prepared. Your father isn't the type to give up easily. He may try other tactics to force you to return. Daisy nodded, twisting her hands in her lap. I've been thinking about that, about us. She took a deep breath. You offered this marriage as a temporary solution until the danger passed. But I'm beginning to wonder if that danger will ever truly pass as long as my father lives. Preston set aside the poker and turned to face her fully. What are you saying, Daisy? I'm saying that perhaps we should consider making this arrangement more permanent. The words came out in a rush. For protection, if nothing else. Something flickered in Preston's eyes, hope, perhaps. Is that the only reason? Daisy felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I've come to respect you greatly these past weeks. You're not like any man I've known before. You're honorable and kind, and you've asked nothing of me in return for your protection." "I didn't help you to gain something in return," he said softly. "I know, and that's precisely why." She faltered, uncertain how to express the confusing feelings that had been growing within her. "I think I could be happy here with you if you wanted that too." Preston reached out slowly, taking her hand in his. His palm was calloused from hard work, warm against her skin. "When I offered to marry you, it wasn't entirely selfless," he admitted. "From the moment I saw you on that dusty road, something about you called to me. Your courage, your determination. I told myself it was just admiration, but it's grown into something more." He squeezed her hand gently. "I would be honored if you chose to stay, Daisy. Not out of necessity, but because you want to. Because you might, in time, come to care for me as more than just your protector." Daisy felt tears prick at her eyes. "I think I already do." The confession hung between them, fragile and new. Preston lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles with a reverence that made her breath catch. "We should sleep," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Tomorrow will be a trying day." As had become their routine, Preston prepared his pallet by the fire while Daisy took the bed. But this night, as she watched him settle onto the hard floor, something within her rebelled at the artificial distance between them. "Preston," she said softly. He looked up at her, his face shadowed in the firelight. "This is your bed too, I don't think. That is, I wouldn't mind if you shared it. Just for sleeping," she added quickly, feeling her face flame. A slow smile spread across his features. "Are you sure?" Daisy nodded, moving to make space for him. Preston extinguished the lamp and slid cautiously onto the bed beside her, maintaining a careful distance between their bodies. "Good night, Daisy," he whispered. "Good night, husband," she replied, the word no longer feeling strange on her tongue. In the morning, they rode into Las Vegas together to meet with the sheriff. Dorothy accompanied them, ready to corroborate Daisy's account of Mr. Holloway's death. The sheriff, a weathered man named Jenkins with keen eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, listened carefully to Daisy's story. He asked pointed questions about the events leading up to the shooting, making notes in a small leather-bound book. "And you say Holloway threatened to drag you back to Sacramento against your will," he clarified. "Yes, sir. He grabbed me with such force that I had bruises for days." Daisy glanced at Dorothy, who nodded in confirmation. "I saw the bruises myself," Dorothy added. 5 distinct marks where his fingers dug into her arm. Sheriff Jenkins looked thoughtful. "I've known men like Holloway before. Rich fellows who think their money entitles them to whatever or whoever they want." He closed his notebook. "Based on your testimony and Miss Warren's corroboration, I'm inclined to rule this a case of self-defense. Especially given that you were fleeing an arranged marriage which, while not illegal, certainly puts your actions in a more sympathetic light." Relief washed over Daisy. "Thank you, Sheriff." "Don't thank me yet," Jenkins warned. "Your father has considerable influence even out here. He's been making quite a fuss, offering rewards for information and threatening legal action against anyone who helps you." His gaze shifted to Preston. "Including your new husband." Preston's expression remained impassive. "I'm not concerned about threats, Sheriff." "Well, you should be," Jenkins retorted. "Edward Whitaker isn't just any banker. He has connections with some powerful men in Sacramento, including judges and politicians. He could make life difficult for you." "What would you suggest?" Daisy asked, anxiety creeping back. Jenkins sighed. "Honestly, I'd suggest you consider moving on. Nevada's a big territory, and there are plenty of places where a young couple could start fresh without this hanging over them." Preston shook his head. That ranch is everything I have. I won't be run off my own land by threats and intimidation." The sheriff studied him for a long moment. "Then you'd better be prepared for trouble, Mr. Blackburn, because I guarantee it's coming." They left the sheriff's office with mixed emotions: relief that Daisy wouldn't face murder charges, but concern about what her father might do next. As they walked toward the general store where they'd left their horses, Preston suddenly stiffened, his hand moving to Daisy's back protectively. "Don't look now," he murmured, "but your father and 3 men I don't recognize just entered the saloon across the street." Daisy felt her heart race. "Do you think they saw us?" "I don't know, but we shouldn't take chances. Let's get our supplies and head back to the ranch." They hurried their errands, but as they were loading supplies onto their horses, a commotion from the saloon caught their attention. Edward Whitaker emerged, followed by the 3 men Preston had noticed earlier, rough-looking characters who stood out even in a frontier town like Las Vegas. "Daisy," Edward called out, striding purposefully toward them. "I need to speak with you." Preston stepped between them. "She has nothing to say to you, Mr. Whitaker." Edward's face flushed with anger. "Stand aside, Blackburn. This is family business." "I am her family now," Preston replied evenly. "A sham marriage to escape justice is hardly family," Edward spat. "You think I don't know what's happening here? You saw an opportunity to get your hands on a wealthy man's daughter and took it." Daisy moved to stand beside Preston. "That's not true, Father. Preston married me to protect me from you and your schemes." Edward's eyes narrowed. "Is that what you think? That I arranged your marriage to Arnold for my own gain?" For the first time, something like hurt flickered across his features. "I was trying to secure your future, Daisy. Arnold was wealthy, established. He could have provided for you in ways this rancher never could." "He was cruel," Daisy countered. "He viewed me as property, just as you did. Preston sees me as a person with my own mind and will." The 3 men who had accompanied Edward spread out slightly, their posture suggesting they were prepared for trouble. Preston noticed the movement and tensed. "Mr. Whitaker," he said quietly, "we've had this conversation before. The sheriff has heard Daisy's account of what happened with Holloway and is satisfied that she acted in self-defense. Your daughter is my wife now, legally and properly. I suggest you accept that and return to Sacramento." Edward's expression hardened. "You think it's that simple? That you can steal my daughter and I'll just accept it?" He gestured to the men behind him. "These gentlemen work for the Pinkerton Detective Agency. They're here to investigate the circumstances surrounding Arnold's death and this supposed marriage of yours." One of the men stepped forward, producing a badge. "Madam, we have some questions about your relationship with the deceased." Preston's hand moved to the gun at his hip. "My wife has already given her statement to the proper authorities. She's not answering any questions from private detectives hired by her father." The situation was deteriorating quickly. Dorothy, who had been silent throughout the exchange, suddenly spoke up. "Uncle Edward, please. This isn't helping anyone. Daisy made her choice just as I made mine. Forcing us back won't change our minds." Edward barely glanced at his niece. "Stay out of this, Dorothy. Your father is dealing with you separately." One of the Pinkerton men moved closer to Daisy. "Mrs. Blackburn, we can do this the easy way or the hard way, but we will be asking you some questions." What happened next unfolded in seconds. Preston stepped forward to block the detective's approach, and the man reached for his weapon. Sheriff Jenkins, who had apparently been observing from the doorway of his office, intervened. "That's enough," he shouted, striding into the street, his own gun drawn. "There will be no violence in my town." The detective slowly raised his hands. "No trouble, Sheriff, just doing our job." Jenkins scowled. "Your job doesn't include threatening my citizens." Mrs. Blackburn has provided a full statement about the Holloway incident, which I've accepted as self-defense. Unless you have a warrant from a Nevada judge, you have no authority to question her." Edward Whitaker's face contorted with rage. "This isn't over, Daisy. Not by a long shot." He turned to Preston. "And you, Blackburn, enjoy my daughter's company while you can. I'll see this marriage annulled if it's the last thing I do." With that, he stormed away, the Pinkerton detectives following reluctantly after an authoritative nod from the sheriff. Jenkins turned to Preston and Daisy. "I'd get back to your ranch if I were you, and I'd consider posting some guards. Those aren't men who give up easily." Preston nodded grimly. "Thank you, Sheriff." The ride back to the ranch was tense, each of them lost in thought about the confrontation in town. When they arrived, Preston immediately began checking the property, ensuring that all entry points were secure. He assigned ranch hands to patrol the perimeter and kept his rifle within easy reach at all times. That night, as they prepared for bed, Daisy could see the worry etched in Preston's features. "You think they'll come here?" she asked softly. Preston sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know. Your father seems determined, and those Pinkerton men looked like they meant business." He sat beside her on the bed. "Daisy, I need to ask you something important." She nodded, feeling a tightness in her chest at his serious tone. "If things get worse, if it seems like they might force you to return, would you consider leaving? Not back to Sacramento," he added quickly, "but somewhere else. Somewhere they couldn't find you." "Without you?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Preston took her hand. "I'd sell the ranch and follow as soon as I could, but your safety comes first." Daisy's response was immediate and firm. "No, I won't run again, and I won't be separated from you." She squeezed his hand. "We'll face whatever comes together." The tenderness in Preston's eyes made her breath catch. "Together," he echoed, bringing her hand to his lips. That night he held her as they slept, her back pressed against his chest, his arm draped protectively around her waist. Despite the threats hanging over them, Daisy slept more peacefully than she had in weeks, secure in the knowledge that whatever happened, she wasn't alone anymore. The next morning, Dorothy announced her decision to leave for Montana. "I've written to my friend Emily in Helena," she explained over breakfast. "She says they desperately need teachers, and with my education, I should have no trouble finding a position." "Are you sure?" Daisy asked, concern evident in her voice. "Traveling alone could be dangerous." Dorothy smiled reassuringly. "I won't be alone. Sheriff Jenkins mentioned a group of settlers heading north next week. He introduced me to the wagon master, a very respectable woman named Mrs. Caldwell. They've agreed to let me travel with them." Preston nodded approvingly. "That's good thinking, Dorothy. Mrs. Caldwell has a solid reputation. She's led 3 successful wagon trains to Montana already." "But what about Father?" Daisy pressed. "Won't he try to stop you?" Dorothy's expression hardened slightly. "He can try, but I'm of age and I've committed no crime. Besides, once you're settled here safely, I'll be the least of his concerns." The week passed in uneasy vigilance. Preston and his ranch hands kept watch for any sign of trouble, but none came. By the time Dorothy was ready to depart with the wagon train, they had almost begun to hope that Edward Whitaker had given up and returned to Sacramento. The morning of Dorothy's departure was emotional. The cousins embraced tightly, both crying. "Write to me," Daisy urged. "Let me know you've arrived safely." "I will," Dorothy promised. "And you must write too. Tell me everything about your new life here." Preston helped load Dorothy's trunk onto the wagon and spoke briefly with Mrs. Caldwell, slipping her some extra money to ensure Dorothy's comfort during the journey. As the wagon train pulled away, Daisy felt a mixture of sadness and hope. Her cousin was embarking on a new adventure, seeking the independence they had both fought for. They were halfway back to the ranch when they spotted the smoke. "Preston," Daisy said, grabbing his arm and pointing. "Is that fire?" he confirmed grimly, spurring his horse to a gallop. As they crested the hill overlooking the ranch, the devastation became clear. The main house was engulfed in flames, black smoke billowing into the clear blue sky. Several of Preston's ranch hands were frantically trying to contain the blaze, forming a bucket line from the creek to the house. Preston rode directly into the chaos, shouting orders and joining the effort to save what could be saved. Daisy followed, her heart pounding with fear and rage. She knew, without being told, that this was her father's doing. By nightfall, it was clear that the main house was beyond saving. The structure had collapsed in on itself, leaving only the stone chimney standing amid the smoldering ruins. The barn had been spared, as had the cabin where Daisy and Preston lived, but the destruction was still a devastating blow. As they stood amid the ashes, one of the ranch hands approached Preston. "Boss, we found this nailed to the corral post." He handed over a piece of paper. Preston unfolded it, his expression darkening as he read. Without a word, he passed it to Daisy. "This is just the beginning. Send her home where she belongs, or next time it won't be just the house." The note wasn't signed, but it didn't need to be. Daisy crumpled it in her fist, anger burning inside her as hot as the flames that had consumed Preston's home. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "This is all because of me." Preston's arm came around her shoulders, pulling her close. "No, this is because of men who believe they own other people. This is not your fault, Daisy." Later that night, in the safety of their cabin, Preston paced restlessly. "We need to go to the sheriff," he said. "Report this arson." "And then what?" Daisy asked. "Even if Sheriff Jenkins believes us, and I think he will, what can he do? Father will deny everything, and those Pinkerton men will provide alibis for each other." Preston stopped pacing, his expression resolute. "Then we fight back our own way." "What do you mean?" "I mean we make it clear that intimidation won't work, that burning down my house won't make me give you up." He knelt before her, taking her hands in his. "Daisy, I know our marriage began as a practical arrangement, but my feelings for you are real. I will not let your father or anyone else take you against your will." Tears welled in Daisy's eyes at the fierce protectiveness in his voice. "I feel the same way, but I'm afraid for you, Preston. My father is powerful and vindictive. He won't stop until he gets what he wants." Preston's jaw set in determination. "Then we'll have to show him that what he wants is no longer possible." He stood, pulling her gently to her feet. "Do you trust me, Daisy?" "With my life," she answered without hesitation. "Then here's what we're going to do." The following morning, they rode into Las Vegas and went directly to the sheriff's office to report the arson. As expected, Jenkins was sympathetic, but limited in what he could do without direct evidence linking Edward Whitaker or the Pinkerton detectives to the crime. "I'll keep an eye out for them," he promised, "but unless someone comes forward as a witness." "We understand," Preston said, "but we wanted to make it official in case this escalates further." Their next stop was the bank, where Preston withdrew a significant portion of his savings. Then they visited the telegraph office, where Daisy sent a message to a cousin in San Francisco, one of the few family members who had shown sympathy for her situation. "What now?" Daisy asked as they left the telegraph office. "Now we go to church," Preston said with a slight smile. The Las Vegas church was small and simple, with plain wooden pews and a modest altar. The preacher, Reverend Thomas, greeted them warmly. "Mr. and Mrs. Blackburn, what brings you here today?" "We'd like to renew our vows," Preston explained. "Our first ceremony was rather hasty, and we'd like to make a more public declaration." The preacher's eyebrows rose in surprise. I see. When would you like to do this? Today, if possible, Daisy said. And we'd like to invite the whole town. Word spread quickly through Las Vegas about the impromptu vow renewal ceremony. By mid-afternoon, the small church was filled with curious townsfolk, many of whom had heard rumors about the mysterious Mrs. Blackburn and her connection to the wealthy banker from Sacramento. Preston had arranged for a notice to be posted at the saloon, the general store, and several other locations around town. Preston and Daisy Blackburn invite all citizens of Las Vegas to witness the renewal of their marriage vows, 3 p.m. today at the church. Refreshments to follow. As Daisy prepared in a small side room of the church, dressed in a new blue dress they had purchased that morning, a knock sounded at the door. When she opened it, Sheriff Jenkins stood there looking uncomfortable. "Mrs. Blackburn, I thought you should know. Your father and those Pinkerton men are in town. They've heard about the ceremony and are asking questions." Daisy nodded calmly. "We expected they might be. Are they planning to disrupt the service?" "Not that I know of. I've warned them that any disturbance in my town will result in a night in my jail." He hesitated. "But they're determined men." "Thank you for the warning, Sheriff. Will you be staying for the ceremony?" Jenkins tugged at his collar. "I suppose I should in an official capacity." The ceremony began precisely at 3 o'clock. Preston stood at the altar, looking handsome in a new shirt and vest, his dark hair neatly combed. As Daisy walked down the aisle toward him, she was acutely aware of the packed church, with familiar and unfamiliar faces turning to watch her progress. Near the back, she spotted her father, his face a mask of cold fury flanked by the Pinkerton detectives. When she reached Preston, he took her hands in his grip warm and reassuring. "Are you ready?" he whispered. "More than ready," she replied. Reverend Thomas cleared his throat. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness the renewal of marriage vows between Preston Blackburn and Daisy Whitaker Blackburn." A murmur ran through the congregation at the name Whitaker, many now making the connection to the wealthy banker in their midst. "Before we begin," the preacher continued, "Preston has asked to say a few words to the community." Preston turned to face the assembled townspeople, his voice clear and steady. "Thank you all for coming today. Many of you don't know us well, and there have been rumors circulating about how Daisy and I came to be married. I want to address those directly." He paused, his gaze finding Edward Whitaker in the crowd. Daisy came to Nevada fleeing an arranged marriage to a man who did not love her, who saw her only as a business transaction. When circumstances placed her in danger, I offered her marriage as protection, a marriage of convenience. Another murmur rippled through the church. Preston continued, his voice growing stronger. "What began as an arrangement, however, has become something far more precious. I stand before you today not out of obligation or duty, but because I have fallen deeply in love with my wife." Daisy felt tears spring to her eyes at the raw emotion in his voice. This was no performance for the townspeople. Every word rang with sincere feeling. "There are those who would try to separate us," Preston said, his gaze still locked on Edward Whitaker, "who believe they have the right to decide Daisy's future for her. To them, I say this, only one marriage happens here by choice, the choice Daisy and I have made to build a life together." He turned back to Daisy, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "I love you, Daisy Blackburn. Not for your family name or connections, but for your courage, your kindness, and your strength. I vow to stand by you against any who would tear us apart, to protect and cherish you all the days of my life." Daisy swallowed hard, struggling to speak past the lump in her throat. "Preston, when I met you, I was running from a life others had planned for me. I never expected to find someone who would see me, truly see me, and value my choices, my dreams." She squeezed his hands. "What began as gratitude has blossomed into the deepest love I've ever known. I choose you, freely and completely, as my husband, and I vow that no force on earth will ever separate us." As they exchanged rings, simple gold bands Preston had purchased that morning, a commotion arose from the back of the church. Edward Whitaker stood, his face purple with rage. "This is a farce," he shouted. "My daughter was promised to another man. This marriage is invalid." Sheriff Jenkins moved quickly to intercept him, but Preston raised a hand. "Let him speak, Sheriff. Let everyone hear what kind of man would sell his own daughter for business advantage." Edward strode forward, pushing past several startled townspeople. "You think you're clever, Blackburn, staging this little performance, but the law is on my side. Daisy was betrothed before she ever met you." "A betrothal is not a marriage, Mr. Whitaker," Reverend Thomas interjected firmly. "And in the eyes of God and the law, your daughter is now Mrs. Blackburn." "She killed the man I chose for her," Edward shouted, pointing an accusing finger at Daisy. "She's a murderer." A shocked gasp went through the congregation. Preston stepped protectively in front of Daisy, but she gently moved him aside, facing her father directly. "I acted in self-defense against a man who attacked me," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the church. "Sheriff Jenkins has heard my testimony and that of my cousin, who witnessed the entire incident." All eyes turned to the sheriff, who nodded confirmation. "That's correct. Based on the evidence and testimony, I've ruled Mr. Holloway's death a case of justified self-defense." Edward's face contorted with fury. "This isn't over, Daisy. I'll have this marriage annulled." You'll do nothing," interrupted a new voice from the church entrance. Everyone turned to see a distinguished-looking older man in an expensive suit, accompanied by two uniformed lawmen. He strode forward with the confidence of authority. "Judge William Monroe," he announced for the benefit of the congregation, "Federal Circuit Court for the Nevada Territory." He fixed Edward Whitaker with a stern glare. "And you, sir, are dangerously close to being arrested for harassment, intimidation, and if my sources are correct, arson." Edward paled slightly. "I don't know what you're talking about." Judge Monroe smiled thinly. "No. Well, perhaps the sworn statements from the Pinkerton detectives you hired will refresh your memory." He held up several official-looking documents. "They've been quite cooperative since learning that acting as your agents in criminal activities could cost them their licenses." The judge turned to Daisy and Preston. "Mrs. Blackburn, Mr. Blackburn, I apologize for interrupting your ceremony. A cousin of yours in San Francisco, Margaret Whitaker, I believe telegraphed my office with concerns about this situation. When I learned a federal judge was needed in Las Vegas on other business, I decided to investigate personally." Daisy felt a rush of gratitude for Cousin Margaret, who had always been kind to her growing up. The telegram they had sent that morning had reached its mark. "Your Honor," Preston said, "we appreciate your intervention." Judge Monroe nodded. "Please continue with your ceremony. Mr. Whitaker and I will have a private conversation outside." He gestured to the lawman, who moved to escort Edward from the church. "You can't do this," Edward protested. "I have rights. So does your daughter," the judge replied coldly. "And from what I've gathered, you've shown little regard for hers. Now, shall we step outside, or would you prefer these officers to escort you to the jail instead?" With a final venomous glare at Daisy and Preston, Edward allowed himself to be led from the church. The Pinkerton detectives, looking thoroughly chastened, followed without protest. A stunned silence fell over the congregation, broken only when Reverend Thomas cleared his throat. "Well then, shall we continue?" The remainder of the ceremony proceeded without interruption. When Preston kissed Daisy at its conclusion, a real kiss this time, tender and passionate, the church erupted in applause. The citizens of Las Vegas, who loved nothing more than a good drama and a happy ending, had fully embraced the romantic tale of the couple who had defied convention and powerful enemies to be together. The reception that followed, held in the town's largest saloon, cleared of its usual activities for the occasion, became something of a celebration for the entire community. Judge Monroe joined them, explaining that he had been working with Sheriff Jenkins for several days to build a case against Edward Whitaker. The Pinkerton men rolled over quite quickly when faced with the loss of their careers, he told Preston and Daisy. They've provided signed statements admitting they were hired to intimidate you and, if necessary, forcibly return Daisy to Sacramento. And the fire at our ranch? Preston asked. The judge nodded grimly. They've implicated your father in that as well, Mrs. Blackburn. He hired local troublemakers to set the blaze while the detectives established alibis for themselves in town. Will he go to prison? Daisy asked, her feelings toward her father a complicated mixture of anger, hurt, and a lingering, unwanted affection. That depends, Judge Monroe said carefully. If you press charges for the arson and harassment, almost certainly. However, there is another option. What's that? Preston asked, his arm protectively around Daisy's waist. I've spoken with Mr. Whitaker at length. He is not pleased with his current situation. But he's also a practical man who understands when he's been defeated. The judge leaned closer. He's offered to provide compensation for the damage to your ranch and to sign a legal document acknowledging your marriage and renouncing any claims on his daughter in exchange for you not pressing criminal charges. Daisy and Preston exchanged a look. What do you think? She asked him softly. Preston considered for a moment. The money would help rebuild the house, and having legal documentation that he recognizes our marriage could prevent future troubles. He squeezed her hand. But it's your father, Daisy. This decision should be yours. Daisy took a deep breath, thinking about the years of controlling behavior, the dismissal of her feelings and desires, culminating in the attempt to force her into marriage with a man she despised. Yet she also remembered moments from her childhood, her father teaching her to ride, his rare but genuine smile when she made him proud. I don't want him in prison, she said finally, but I want him to understand that he has no power over me anymore. If he's willing to sign such a document and compensate Preston for the damage, then I won't press charges. Judge Monroe nodded approvingly. A wise and compassionate decision. I'll have the papers drawn up tonight and we can settle this matter before I leave tomorrow. The following morning, in the sheriff's office, Edward Whitaker signed the documents without meeting Daisy's eyes. The compensation he offered for the damaged ranch house was generous, more than enough to rebuild and make improvements. The legal declaration acknowledging Preston and Daisy's marriage was detailed and binding, with Judge Monroe and Sheriff Jenkins both witnessing his signature. When the business was concluded, Edward finally looked at his daughter. I hope you know what you're doing, Daisy, he said stiffly. This life won't be easy. I know exactly what I'm doing, Father, Daisy replied calmly. I'm choosing happiness over wealth, love over convenience. I'm sorry you can't understand that. Edward's expression softened fractionally. Your mother would have understood. She was similarly headstrong. It was as close to an acknowledgement of Daisy's choices as he could manage. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. If you ever need anything. He left the offer hanging in the air. Thank you, Daisy said, recognizing the olive branch for what it was. Give my love to Mother and James. Her younger brother, still at school back east, had been too young to be involved in the arranged marriage schemes. With a curt nod, Edward departed, the Pinkerton detectives trailing in his wake. Daisy watched through the window as they mounted their horses and rode out of Las Vegas, presumably heading back to Sacramento. "Are you all right?" Preston asked gently, coming to stand beside her. Daisy nodded, surprised to find tears in her eyes. "Yes." "It's strange. I'm relieved it's over, but also sad somehow. He's still my father." Preston wrapped his arms around her. "Family is complicated, but we're building our own family now, one based on love and respect." Judge Monroe approached, holding the signed documents. "These are yours to keep, Mrs. Blackburn. I've filed copies with the territorial court as well, for added security." He smiled warmly. "I wish you both every happiness in your life together." With the threat from Edward Whitaker neutralized, Preston and Daisy turned their attention to rebuilding their ranch. The compensation money allowed them to construct a larger, more comfortable house than the one that had burned. Local craftsmen, many of whom had attended their vow renewal ceremony and been moved by their story, offered their services at reduced rates. Throughout the summer and fall of 1875, the new house took shape. Daisy threw herself into creating a true home, planting an expanded garden and adding personal touches to every room. Preston, watching her flourish in her new role as ranch mistress, fell more deeply in love with her each day. Their cabin, which had initially been a temporary shelter, became a guest house for visiting friends. The first to use it was Dorothy, who returned from Montana for a visit at Christmas. She had secured a position as a teacher in Helena and was thriving in her newfound independence. "You look so happy," she told Daisy as they sat by the fire in the new house on Christmas Eve. "Both of you do." Preston smiled, his arm around his wife's shoulders. "We are. The ranch is doing well, and next spring we're expanding the herd." "And we've had a letter from Father," Daisy added, surprising Dorothy. "A civil one, asking after our health and offering to send some of my mother's things that he thought I might want." Dorothy's eyebrows rose. "Uncle Edward is coming around." "I wouldn't go that far," Daisy laughed. "But it's a start." I've written back, keeping things cordial but firm. As the evening progressed, with Dorothy regaling them with tales of her adventures in Montana, Daisy felt a profound contentment wash over her. The journey that had begun in fear and desperation had led her to a life richer and more fulfilling than she could have imagined. Later that night, as she and Preston prepared for bed in their new home, she shared this thought with him. "When I fled that church in Sacramento, I never dreamed I'd end up here," she said, brushing her hair at the dressing table he had built for her. "I just wanted to escape. I never thought I'd find love." Preston came to stand behind her, his hands resting gently on her shoulders. "And I never thought a chance encounter with two desperate women on the road would change my life completely." He bent to kiss her neck. "I thank God every day that it did." Daisy turned to face him, setting aside her brush. "I have something to tell you," she said, a smile playing at her lips. "Something wonderful." Preston's brow furrowed slightly. "What is it?" Taking his hand, Daisy placed it gently on her stomach. "In about 7 months, our family will be growing by one." Joy spread across Preston's features, his eyes widening in wonder. "A baby, you're certain?" Daisy nodded, her own happiness mirrored in his expression. "The doctor confirmed it yesterday when I went into town for supplies. I wanted to wait until Christmas Eve to tell you." Preston pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "This is the greatest gift I could have imagined," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. That night, as they lay together in the darkness of their bedroom, Daisy reflected on the strange and winding path that had brought her here. From a sheltered banker's daughter to a fugitive, from a woman desperate enough to agree to a marriage of convenience to a wife deeply in love with her husband and carrying his child. "What are you thinking about?" Preston murmured, his hand gently caressing her still flat stomach. "About choices," Daisy replied, "about how sometimes the hardest decisions lead to the greatest happiness." Preston pulled her closer. "Only one marriage happens here by choice," he quoted softly. "I meant those words with all my heart." "I know," Daisy said, turning to kiss him. "And choosing you was the best decision I ever made." Summer 1876 brought not only sweltering heat to the Nevada desert, but also the birth of their first child, a son they named Samuel, after Preston's father. Dorothy returned from Montana to help during Daisy's confinement, and even received a letter from her own father expressing cautious interest in meeting his grandson someday. As the years passed, the Blackburn Ranch prospered. Preston's careful management and innovations in cattle breeding brought them financial security, while Daisy's garden expanded into a small orchard that produced fruit sold in Las Vegas and surrounding communities. In 1878, they welcomed a daughter, Emma, with Dorothy returning once again to assist during the birth. By then, Dorothy had become engaged to a fellow teacher in Helena, a kind and scholarly man who shared her passion for education. Edward Whitaker never did visit the ranch, but his letters became more frequent and less formal over time. When Samuel turned 5, Edward sent him a pony apiece, offering that Daisy accepted with grace. Though the relationship remained complicated, the bitterness gradually faded, replaced by a cautious respect. The small settlement of Las Vegas grew slowly but steadily. By 1885, when their third child, another boy they named William, arrived, the town had a proper school, a larger church, and even a small hotel. Preston served on the town council, while Daisy helped establish a lending library. Their love, which had begun in such unusual circumstances, deepened with each passing year. The marriage of convenience had transformed into a partnership built on mutual respect, shared dreams, and unwavering devotion. On their 10th anniversary, Preston surprised Daisy by recreating their vow renewal ceremony, this time with their children in attendance. As they repeated the promises they had made to each other, surrounded by friends who had become like family, Daisy marveled at the journey that had brought them to this moment. "Only one marriage happens here by choice," Preston had declared all those years ago, standing firm against those who would have torn them apart. In choosing each other day after day, year after year, they had created not just a marriage but a life of extraordinary love and happiness. Proof that sometimes the most beautiful beginnings arise from the most desperate circumstances.